Hello, my name is Reese Waters and welcome back to Learn Akkadian. On this episode, we're going to talk about the G system. The G system takes its name from the German word Grund, which means basic. That's because this system gives us the most general meaning of a verb. As I discussed last week, verbs take their meanings from putting root letters into different patterns. And today, we're going to talk about the different patterns that give us meanings within this G system. In addition to system, which tells us the particular meaning of a verb to interpret, verbs also have several other components, including person, like first person, I or we, second person, like you or y'all, or third person, like he, she, it, or they. And verbs can also have different genders, like masculine or feminine, which would be the difference between he and she, or number, which is the difference between he or they. It shows plurality. There's either a singular or there's a plural. Lastly, verbs have different tenses. So the first three components, which I've just described, are found by looking at the different prefixes and suffixes which are added to the stem of the verb. But tense, on the other hand, is taken by putting the verb into different patterns to construct the stem. In order to explain this, I'm going to show you the three basic tenses of a G system verb, sharakum. So here we have the word sharakum, which, as we've learned, means to steal. And as you can see based off the colors, I've represented where each root letter belongs within this pattern to form the dictionary form or the G infinitive, with the sheen, the first root letter, coming at the beginning, the second root letter, R, coming in the middle, and the third root letter, Q, coming right here. So if we want to change this word, to steal, into a different verb, like, for example, he stole, we would have to change the pattern. In addition to the infinitive, we're going to talk about three other tenses in the G system: the future present, the simple past, and the perfect. Now keep in mind, in Akkadian, the future and the present tense are combined into one. So when we're translating, we have to use context to differentiate whether or not a verb means I will run or I run. The simple past would have a meaning similar to I ran, and the perfect would be like I have run. Each of these tenses has their own pattern, which we plug in the root letters to get the different forms of the verb. Now, as you can see here, I've used different colors to mark where different root letters should belong. So as you can see, 1 marks where the first root letter would go within the pattern, 2, the second root letter, and 3, the third root letter. Now also notice that these begin with the letter I. Now this is subject to change based off the subject of the verb, and we'll discuss this in more detail later on in the video. But for right now, just remember that the I shows that this is a third person singular verb. With different verbs, we're going to see a lot of different root letters in different positions, but they're always going to follow these patterns when they're appearing in a particular tense. Now, I'm going to insert each respective root letter into their position so you can see how these words would have actually appeared. Keep in mind that while Akkadian is going to be translated from Cuneiform, learning the different paradigms with Latin characters is extremely useful because it allows us to better understand what would have been heard and what would have been intended by different words. So for most of this course, we're going to use Latin letters in order to demonstrate the different forms of the grammar. And then we'll use cuneiform in order to solidify these ideas and to demonstrate how they're going to show up in translation. Now that I've inserted the root letters into their respective positions, you'll notice that there's one thing still strange about the word, and that is the V1, V2, and V1, which are marking where the thematic vowel is going to need to go. So what is the thematic vowel? A thematic vowel is a variable vowel which we can find in the paradigms for the G system and the N system. We know what vowel to expect based off listings found with each verb in the dictionary, which are marked with thematic vowel 1 and thematic vowel 2. We then plug these into the paradigm in order to get our respective word. There are 6 possibilities for the thematic vowel listing which we can find in the dictionary. I have them written for you here. These are A/U, E/U, U/U, I/I, A/A, or E/E, with the first letter representing V1 and the second letter representing V2. When completing a paradigm to find what you should expect for the tenses of a certain verb, we would then consult the dictionary and plug the vowel into the respective position which is said in the paradigm with V1 or V2. After looking it up in the dictionary, I can determine that the thematic vowel for shirakum is I and I. So using this combination, I would know that for my first paradigm, where V1 is required, I would list an I, because there's an I in the first position. And where V2 is required, I would again list an I, this time because an I is in the second position. And where V1, again, I would look at the first position and I would list an I. And this is going to tell me, when normalizing from cuneiform, what I should expect for the future present, simple past, and perfect tense. So now that we've completed our paradigms, let's translate it. Isharik means either the future or present of shirakum, he, she, or it will steal, or he, she, or it steals in the present tense. Ishrik again translates shirakum, this time into the simple past, meaning he, she, or it stole. Ishtarik translates into the perfect tense, meaning he, she, or it has stolen. I know that these paradigms can seem a bit overwhelming at first, but let's do another example, and you'll realize that the different patterns make things a lot simpler, and they're pretty easy to understand. So let's look at parasum, which is a word which means to divide, with a first root letter P, second root letter R, and a third root letter S. So using our patterns, we're going to plug in these root letters to figure out what we should get. Just like shirakum, you can see that these three root letters fit into the exact same pattern to give us our three different tenses, which we would translate as he, she, or it will divide, or he, she, or it divides in the present tense. Simple past, he, she, or it divided, or perfect, he, she, or it has divided. You'll also notice that the thematic vowel is different for the word parasum. Here, A is used for the first thematic vowel, and U is used for the second thematic vowel. So although this looks a lot different than our last word, isharik, we see that it follows the exact same pattern, and only the root letters and thematic vowels change. Let's do one more example, this time with a verb of being. Here, our word is maratsum, which means to be ill. Our thematic vowel is A/A. So let's fill out the paradigm to see what we'd get. So here you can see our three G system tenses of the verb maratsum, with the first root letter, again, finding the first spot, the second in the second spot, and the third in the third spot. And our thematic vowels, A and A, have been plugged in for the first thematic vowel and for the second thematic vowel, which is, again, A. So let's translate to see how a verb of being would fit into the future present, simple past, and perfect systems. So we would translate imarats as he, she, or it will become ill, or he, she, or it is ill in the present tense. Imrats, we would translate as he, she, or it was ill, and imtarats, we would translate as he, she, or it has been ill. So as you can see, with the verb of being, we get slightly different translations, but they follow the same patterns and they follow the same tenses in the G system, just putting the different root letters into their various positions. So now that we've learned to form the stem of a G system verb, which indicates the verb's tense, let's learn about the prefixes and suffixes which are added to the stem in order to tell us the person, number, and gender of the subject of the verb. So you'll notice that in all of the examples, I used I, which is the third person singular common prefix. Now this basically means he, she, or it, but any of these other prefixes and suffixes could be used in the exact same place just by attaching them to the beginning of the stem for a prefix and to the direct end of the stem for a suffix, which is shown here. Notice that all of the suffixes have a macron, meaning that they're a long vowel. So let's briefly go through what each different prefix and suffix means. A is a first person singular, so it would be like I. Ta would be the second person singular masculine, showing a masculine you. Ta I would be the second person singular feminine, which is a feminine you. I is the third person singular common, which means he, she, or it. Ni is a first person plural, which would be like we. Ta a would be the second person plural, which is like y'all. I, u would be the third person plural masculine, which is like they, but masculine. And the a would be the third person plural feminine, which is they, feminine. So now let's look at a few examples to better understand how prefixes and suffixes are added to the stem of a verb in order to show the subject. Our first example, Ashrik, uses the root letters Shin, R, and Q from the word sharakum, which means to steal. So we can look at the pattern of these root letters and we can determine that this is in the simple past tense. And then we can look at the prefix, a, and determine that the subject is a first person singular common subject. So that means I. So we can put that together to understand that Ashrik as a whole means I stole. Our second word, taparasi, has the root letters P, R, and S from parasum, which means to divide. And based off the pattern of these root letters, we can determine that it is in the future/present tense. And then we can look at the prefixes and suffixes added to the stem, ta and e, to determine that the subject of the verb is a second person, singular, feminine subject. So altogether, this means either you in the feminine will divide, or you in the feminine divide, present tense. Our third word, nimtarats, has the root letters m, r, and sade in the perfect tense pattern. So we can recognize that this means having been ill. And we can see our prefix is ni, which is the first person plural prefix to show the subject we. So altogether, this means we have been ill. Looking at our last word, isharika, we can identify the root letters shin, r, and q from the word sharakum, which means to steal. Looking at the pattern of these root letters, we can identify that the tense of this verb is the future/present, or the durative tense. And looking at the prefix and the suffix, we can identify that the subject of the verb is a third person feminine plural subject. So to finish things off, let's look at some real cuneiform script from Hammurabi stele, specifically from Law 121, which discusses the rental price for a man to store grain at another man's estate. So here, I've taken out the cuneiform script of two verbs which appear in the G system within this law. So let's translate our first line. This is the ish sign, I, shin. The next sign is bu, pu, bu, pu. And the last sign is uk, ug, and ug. Now we're going to select for our transliteration ish, pu, and uk, which we're going to normalize to ish, puk. So looking at ish, puk, we can recognize that the three root letters appear in the G system simple past tense pattern. And we can recognize that the prefix attached to this stem is the third person singular common prefix, which means he, she, or it. So then what we're going to do is we're going to look up shin, p, and k in our dictionary in order to find the meaning of the dictionary form shapakum. And then we're going to translate this into the tense and the subject of the verb. So consulting the dictionary, I can find that shapakum means to heap up. So I would translate this as he or she heaped up. And in the actual law, this is talking about the heaping up of grain into the man's estate. And this is in the simple past tense, which is important because in a lot of Hammurabi stele, we see the simple past verb tense followed by a later future verb tense. So it's like if he or she did this in the past, then they're going to receive this punishment in the future. So now let's translate our second line. So this first sign is the I sign, followed by the na sign, followed by the ad, at, and at with an emphatic T, followed by D, emphatic T, T, and sa, 2, and the in sign. So next, we're going to normalize this to be I, na, the, di, in, den. And now you can start to see how I'm making the decision of which value to use for each sign. And that's because I knew that if I used add and d, then I would get the double D, which is our future and present tense G system form. So when I use those two values, I get inaden. So I can recognize that the tense of this verb is going to be future/present, and I can identify the root letters in, d, and in, which I can then convert in my head into the dictionary form, nedanum, and I can look this up in the dictionary to get the meaning of the verb. So consulting the dictionary, I can find out that nedanum means to give. So I can translate this to mean he or she will give. And in Hammurabi's law, this actually means that he or she will give a certain payment for the grain that they have heaped up in the simple past tense into the man's estate. So in this episode, we've covered the basics of the G system, including the three main tenses, which are the future present, the simple past, and the perfect tense. We've also talked about the suffixes and prefixes which are added to the stem in order to show us the subject of the verb. On the next episode, I'm going to talk about some special rules that lead to exceptions in verbs appearing in ways that we wouldn't expect. But for right now, the most important thing is for you to start to understand and to recognize these patterns, because this is the foundational skill that's going to be crucial to learning how to translate Akkadian. So thanks everybody for watching, and thanks for your support, and I'll see you again on the next episode of Learn Akkadian.